It's the last reading wrap up of 2020. These are the books that I read in December. So let's jump into it. The first book I read was No Stone Unturned by Steve Jackson. And it's a book that's focused, the subtitle is The Story of the World's Premier Forensic Investigators. It's a nonfiction, and if you are a true crime enthusiast, I would recommend it. It's a really interesting story of the origins of a group called NecroSearch International. And they're a group of civilians, primarily non-police, non-military, who volunteered and got involved in trying to find bodies. So it's a group of, there's forensic anthropologists, there are entomologists, there are geologists, there's dog handlers, and they sort of all join together for the purposes of research and also to help families and law enforcement find bodies, essentially. So, and the work that they've done since the 70s, the research they've done, the experiments that they've done are sort of the foundation of what we know about, aging a body based on insect life cycle, all sort of the methodologies for locating bodies, different rates of decomposition based on, soil, climate, all sorts of factors. And what was interesting in the book is they did case studies on, if you are a true crime enthusiast, famous cases that you've probably heard of or heard referenced in some way. The group did research essentially towards the beginning. They were known as the pig people because they started burying pigs being close to humans anatomically, to kind of track how bodies broke down in different conditions. So really interesting story, would recommend. The next book I read was a series of short stories called Voices of the Fall, and the editor was John Ringo, who's the writer of the Black Tide Rising series. These stories were from a variety of authors, and it was, light zombie reading, which I'm a fan of. I do like the Black Tide Rising series, and it seems like a lot of other people do based on the proliferation. This is one of several books of short stories for them. So it went anywhere from, what happened to folks on a nuclear submarine, paid hunters that are on an island, who are kind of isolated. They're there as part of a research project with scientists, assassins, and retirees. Also, former soldiers. There's one where it's a former soldier has established sort of a kingdom of his own based heavily around marijuana usage. So, it was light. It was fine. The next two books I read also are post-apocalyptic fiction, and they are by DJ Molles. It's the Remaining series, book 1 and 2. The first is just called The Remaining, and the second is called Aftermath. So, oh my. So this, and I think I actually have read these before, but it was one of those things I came across the books used and was like, I think this sounds familiar. But after a while, if you've read a lot of zombie canon, they all start to kind of run together in your head. So I thought I'd give them a try. In this world of The Remaining, our protagonist is Captain Lee Hardin, and he's a Special Forces Army officer, part of a contingent of military who are set up with homes over top bunkers. And they're given special training so that if, any of, a host of possible, contingencies, catastrophes, including, mass illness or sabotage or whatever that causes a breakdown of society happens, they're to spend 30 days kind of waiting out the worst of it and then emerge to help sort of reestablish civilization and order. And to that end, they're given special GPS devices that give them access to special bunkers stocked with food and clothes and ordnance. And they have the training to kind of help civilians get back on their feet and hopefully reestablish civil order. So in the first book, Captain Hardin leaves his bunker early, and he's with his trusty companion, the German Shepherd Tango, and he heads out into a plague-ravaged world. So he's in North Carolina, and in the 3 weeks that he spends underground, most of the population has been infected with a disease that renders them homicidal and ravenous. And those that are unaffected or haven't been infected are either, on the run, trying to evade the infected, and also to evade, the breakdown of civilization and, predatory lawless men that have taken advantage of this new world order and are, pillaging and murdering and raping at whim. So in the first one, he rescues a few people, runs up against some bad guys. He's in a lot of fights. I think this first installment was self-published, and that would explain why there are sort of some grammatical and spelling issues. Lee is a little bit simplistic of a character, but I mean, it's a fast-paced and entertaining read if you're into that sort of thing. I will give you a spoiler because I have a personal pet peeve against any books where the dog dies, and the dog dies. It's kind of set up like you can feel it coming, but still, I don't like it when the dog dies. Now, the second book in the series, The Aftermath, Hardin continues sort of on his mission. His home base has been destroyed. He leads a few of the characters that he initially rescued to safety at a new enclosure, encampment, whatever you want to call it, to relative safety, and that location is called Camp Ryder. And he continues to be pretty mission-focused. He doesn't seem to have much personal interest or connection to the humans he saves. It's more like doing my duty. He encounters additional bad guys among the uninfected. There's a lot of weak-willed people and a lot of, sort of the warlord mentality. I realize that complaining about realism in a zombie book is maybe not practical, but you do really need to sort of suspend your disbelief in this book just for the fact that Captain Hardin seems to be hurt constantly. He has innumerable what could be really serious injuries just in the regular world, much less one where antibiotics and surgery or, anything that in ordinary circumstances would definitely be challenging could definitely be life-threatening in that world due to the absence of, safe places to recover, basic, medical care, sanitation, etc. So he, is losing teeth, tearing tendons, severe flesh wounds that he, in his superhuman abilities, seems to be able to just walk off. Treachery abounds, but he manages to make it through. Again, the book is fast-paced and it's entertaining, if not exactly deep in terms of character development. So the final book that I read for the month was On Writing, a memoir of the craft by Stephen King. And this is a really great book. I initially sort of jotted some notes based on, what stuck with me as I was sitting on the couch last night about the book. And I looked at it more closely to kind of gather. I like to underline and grab my favorite quotes when I'm preparing for recording this. And there were just a ton of things that I underlined in this book. It's really excellent. It's an excellent book among the many excellent books by Stephen King. Personally, his short story, The Long Walk, is one of my favorite stories of all time, so I have a lot of respect for his writing. In this, his recounting of his own history and development of his writing is really personal. It's resonant. He has his normal characteristic attention to detail that makes his experiences really real and poignant. To give you context, he had just started, I guess, writing this book when he was struck by a car when he was walking. And he finished the book or continued writing the book as part of his recovery. So it's having that sort of context for what's happening. It really, I don't know, it creates a different element to the story that he's giving. So he presents concepts within it that you may have heard before, but in his own unique way. So he does things like he describes, the absence of a great idea dump. If writers or journalists had asked him in interviewing him before, like, where do your ideas come from? And he explains that there is no like great place that you're pulling it out of for this. He explains that story or idea is made when two previously unrelated concepts get together to make something new. It's not your job to find the ideas, but rather to recognize them when they come along. And one of my favorite quotes from the book is him quoting early editor of his. When he was still in high school, he got a position writing up sports reporting. And the editor he had said, when you write a story, you're telling yourself the story. When you rewrite, your main job is taking out all the things that are not the story. So I don't think that that's particularly advice that's revolutionary, but I think the way he puts it is really resonant. The points that really stuck out to me, and there's quite a few of them, and I'm just going to summarize them as best I can. He talks about, and the way he discusses it, I think, is just part of it. If you're familiar with his writing, he writes things in a very plain and direct way. It's not grotesque. It's not necessarily vulgar, but it's just very direct. And that's what I like about his advice that he gives here. He talks about, and that way of writing makes the whole process of writing seem less intimidating, more humble, and more personal. At least that's the way it strikes me. So he talks about writing with the doors closed and then rewriting with them open. He says, your stuff starts out being just for you, but then it goes out. Once you know what the story is and get it right as you can anyway, it belongs to anyone who wants to read it or criticize it. That applies to just about any creative process, whether that's, YouTube creation, whether that's art, etc. And I feel like I've spent the past 2 years just getting down the mechanics of creating videos, and I'm by no means finished with that part of the endeavor. So I don't have to think so much about the actual mechanics of filming and editing and how to do a clip and ripple delete or whatever it is. And instead, that gives you the time to focus more on story and process. He talks about sort of the perseverance with writing, stopping a piece of work just because it's hard, either emotionally or imaginatively, is a bad idea. He says even in his own life, I just tried to believe the people who said that things would get better if I gave them time to do so, and I never stopped writing. Some of the stuff that came out was tentative and flat, but at least it was there. And that's very poignant to me. Just that act of putting in the time and persevering. I've heard that Isaac Asimov committed to 6 hours of typing a day. Didn't have to be good, just had to do it. And similar advice I've heard is from Seth Godin. He says, don't just do it, but merely do it. So put your time in doing it. And I think that's sort of a theme that's going throughout the book for Stephen King. He says, it starts with this: put your desk in the corner, and every time you sit down there to write, remind yourself why it isn't in the middle of the room. Life isn't a support system for art, it's the other way around. He encourages you to come with purpose. He says you must not come lightly to the blank page, so know while you're doing it. And as I said, I find his writing to be so appealing because it's so direct. He talks about using the first word that comes to your mind if it's appropriate and colorful. So he encourages you to speak plainly and directly. And in terms of encouragement, he says, and this isn't high school. Now that you're not worried, A, that your skirt is too short or too long and the other kids will laugh at you. B, that you're not going to make the varsity swimming team. C, that you're still going to be a pimple-studded version when you graduate, probably when you die for that matter. D, the physics teacher won't grade the final on a curve. Or E, nobody really likes you anyway, and they never did. Now that all that extraneous shit is out of the way, you can study certain academic matters with a degree of concentration you could never manage while attending the local textbook loony bin. And once you start, you'll find you know almost all of this stuff anyway. It is, as I said, mostly a matter of cleaning the rust off the drill bits and sharpening the blade of your saw. He also gives, pointed advice about not using the passive tense, not using adverbs. He says show, don't tell. Letting go of affectation. And the first affectation begins with the need to define writing as good or bad. He encourages you to both read a lot and write a lot. Again, with the merely do it suggestion. He suggests 4 to 6 hours a day, which he says if you really are someone who's passionate, you're probably doing something close to that anyway. If there's no joy in it, it's no good. So set yourself a daily writing goal. Make it low at first to avoid disappointment. He gets a little metaphysical, saying, the job of fiction is to find the truth inside the story's web of lies. You want to make sure the kernel of truth, the part of yourself that's in characters, is what's going to resonate with readers. Because when readers hear the echo of their own life beliefs, they're apt to be more invested in the story. And in the sort of old saw of writing what you know, it's those elements, the human traits, the universality is what is resident. And he encourages you to use that uniqueness of what you know individually to be brave and come back and tell the readers what it is that you know. He treats stories as relics, part of an undiscovered pre-existing world, and encourages us to get as much of each one out of the ground as intact as possible. His process that he relates is that he doesn't so much use stories as start with situations and puts a group of characters in some sort of predicament and then watches them try to work themselves free. And that's how he describes it, watching them and writing it down. After that, he takes a look at the characters, and then and only then he narrates, reminding us that we're our novel's first reader, not just its creator. He encourages descriptions to be vivid, and that it should be something that, again, will make the reader prickle with recognition, he says. And that our job is to say what we see and then get on with the story. He encourages the use of, again, direct dialogue, but cautions to never tell a thing that you can show instead. In the process of rewriting, He encourages you to give yourself space and time to read over what you've written, to look for underlying patterns, and then when you go to your next draft, to kind of draw those out. Additionally, he quotes Elmore Leonard in terms of who to emulate with pacing, suggesting cutting the story. And the formula, he said, is the second draft equals the first draft minus 10%. And finally, sort of the underlying message here is finding the joy in writing. He talks about when he was coming back with serious injuries after being struck by a car, saying that he'd been in terrible situations before, which writing had helped him get over, helped him forget himself, at least for a while. Reintroducing a kind of stubborn determination and hope that things would get better if he kept at them. The ordinary miracle that comes with any attempt to create something. And he reminds us that the scariest moment is always just before you start. After that, things can only get better. Writing makes life a brighter and more pleasant place. It's about enriching the lives of those who'll read your work and enriching your own life as well. It's about getting up, getting well, and getting over, getting happy. And he asks you to treat this book as a permission slip. You can, you should, and if you're brave enough to start, you will. Writing is magic, as much the water of life as any other creative art. The water is free, so drink and be filled up. So really inspirational stuff, or at least I found it to be so. Mr. King even includes at the end 2 reading lists of things that he enjoyed, and included that book list for you to take a look at as well. And I, in fact, went through and added a bunch of these to my reading list on Goodreads. So, what did you read in the past month? Have you read any of the aforementioned books? Any recommendations? I'd love to hear them. Like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell. Thanks for watching.